Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Darcenovia here. I am back with a review on the Clone Wars micro series. I've been waiting to review this for a long time, and I have finally seen it again after so many years. And I must say, I have a lot to say about this series. Now, this is coming from the perspective of someone who watched it, you know, when the show came out back in 2003 to 2005. So I'm someone that watched it during that time, not long after the fact. Like for most of my expanded universe reviews, most of it is just me reading them for the first time. This is stuff that I have experienced firsthand. Now, for those of you who are more familiar with the 2008 Clone Wars series, the 2003 Clone Wars series, tells its story in 5 minute shorts at the time that it was airing on Cartoon Network. And in 5 minutes, it told us visually, story wise, what was going on in the Clone Wars, and it had some pretty sick, animation. The art style may be a turnoff for some people, but to be honest, I think it works really well. I mean, Granatoski, the guy behind Samurai Jack, come on. The animation is freaking gorgeous. And I know this is preference, though. I think the animation is pretty good for this series. I think it's held up, you know, after all these years. And it's a damn shame Lucasfilm has not given this show the Blu-ray treatment. So what if it's not canon? And so what if TCW dominates both timelines? I think having this show, on Blu-ray would be a good thing as a way to preserve history. This is an important TV series to Star Wars. Without this, you would not have the Clone Wars 2008, Rebels, or any of the shows that are coming out now. Clone Wars 2003 is an important, piece of Star Wars history, and having it not available on Blu-ray and having the DVDs be out of print for so many years is ridiculous. Come on, release this on Blu-ray for God's sake. Hell, you could have it on Blu-ray for one disc and just have the entire series be played like a movie, which it could be. Combined with these two volumes, it's a 2-hour movie essentially. I know some people prefer to have more dialogue in their, Star Wars stories, but to me, this is the series' biggest strength. It's able to tell a much grander story under a shorter amount of time than the Clone Wars 2008 does. My main issue with Clone Wars 2008, the show is too damn long. A lot of the stories it tells are meaningless. It doesn't really give us anything. It doesn't feel like it's really adding anything in the universe. If anything, Clone Wars 2008 feels like it's taking away from the Star Wars universe. It's not really adding anything. Well, Clone Wars 2008, 3 in contrast, it feels like the perfect, series to bridge the gap between episodes 2 and 3. And unlike, a lot of the other stuff in the EU, at least, you could read a lot of the stuff on its own. Clone Wars 2003 can be watched without reading a signal novel in this era. Sure, you're not going to know about Asajj Ventress that much, her backstory, but I do think it's a good series on its own, honestly. And not to mention, I feel like it did a better job with Anakin's journey, from episode 2 to episode 3 than TCW did. Because the issue with TCW is Anakin is just knighted on the drop of a hat with no explanation. We don't know when he got knighted. We don't know why he got knighted so early. And it makes no sense for Anakin to be training a Padawan so young. I mean, Obi-Wan doesn't train a Padawan until he's around his mid-20s. It doesn't make sense for Anakin to be training Ahsoka. And another plus, there's no Ahsoka in here. So Ahsoka doesn't get in the way of Anakin and Obi-Wan actually bonding as friends and brothers, even though you don't see as much of that like you would in Clone Wars 2008. I feel like this does a better job of conveying that they're really good friends. Because the problem with TCW, it has the luxury of having 20 minutes to tell its stories. This series doesn't. Most of the series is 5 minutes, and that's all they have to tell their stories. That limitation, in a way, caused, the animators and the storytellers to be more creative in how they tell their stories. Majority of the episodes don't really have dialogue at all, and to be honest with you, I enjoy that. Honestly, seeing some of those massive battles, on screen is amazing. And freaking Fordo in this, is a fucking badass. What little we see of him, General Grievous. This show has the best version of General Grievous. He's badass. He doesn't mess around. He kills a bunch of Jedi. His voice is awesome. I actually prefer, the guy who originally voiced Grievous over the guy who does him in Revenge of the Sith. I felt it was more menacing and it fit the character more. Not to mention, it did an amazing job foreshadowing Anakin becoming Darth Vader in the last, episode. It's just, there's so much about this show that I could talk about that's so good. The animation, the voice acting. Hell, the guy who does Obi-Wan right now is the guy that did him here. Probably one of the few things I like about TCW is this guy who continues to do, Obi-Wan since this series. I liked how this series did not have, Obi-Wan and Anakin meet. I know I'm just bringing up Clone Wars 2008, but it's hard to because I'm just talking about how this feels like a genuine continuation. It just doesn't feel like it was made just to be made. It feels like a lot of passion was put into this, and it felt like the people actually cared about the canon. Like, this show doesn't contradict the expanded universe, even though there's some minor stuff towards the end that kind of doesn't align well with Labyrinth of Evil. But those problems aside, this show is pretty damn solid, even if you're not a fan of the EU. And I'm just approaching this, as someone who's never watched it. You should at least give this show a watch at least once. Because, it's a different view of the Clone Wars. I feel like it does a better job of conveying, how chaotic the war was and how massive it was. And unlike the 2008 Clone Wars, the Separatists feel like an actual legitimate threat. And I know some people are going to complain, oh, but there's no story. Of course there's a story. You have to pay attention. Not all stories have to have dialogue. This movie, it feels like a movie to me. I'm just going to say it. This show tells its story through the visuals. And I do like the attention and detail they paid into when they did the fight between Anakin and Asajj Ventress. If you pay attention and you listen carefully, I didn't know this until I watched it multiple times. The water drops are the Darth Vader breathing sound. It's like, whoa, epic foreshadowing. I know, everyone has their own taste of what they prefer in Star Wars. I prefer my lightsaber duels to be, to have barely any dialogue, to, be very intense, fast-paced. And I don't want, the Jedi and the Sith to be weak. I want them to be insanely powerful, fast. It's like, this is the only Star Wars media that we've seen the Jedi, be as powerful as we have ever seen them. Like, some of the feats that they were to pull off, we've only seen in the comics and the novels. And probably one of my favorite story, at least because of how jaw-dropping it looks, is when Mace Windu takes on an entire army of droids with his bare hands. That is badass as fuck. I know some people's like, oh, it's so stupid because it's like Dragon Ball Z. Remember the quote in A New Hope? The power, the power to destroy a planet is insignificant compared to the power of the Force. It's logical that the Force would be that fucking strong. And not to mention, I really loved, the connections with the EU. I really do. Even though you're not going to notice it though if you haven't read the material, but like Kamara Volsa's lightsabers, are shown in the show. Even though we've seen them in TCW, but we don't know at this point if they're from Kamari Volsa. But seeing some references to other forms of media is awesome. It really is. And Anakin being knighted was probably the only time we've seen Anakin ever be knighted on screen. And that was cool. I mean, the show, there's just so much I can say that's amazing. I think the guy who does the voice for Anakin, I forgot it wasn't Hayden Christensen doing the voice. It sounds, pretty close to him. And it feels like Star Wars. It looks like Star Wars. And the best thing of all, this show doesn't overstay its welcome, which is something I feel like TCW does. Not every show needs to be 7 or 8 seasons to be good. This show has about 3 seasons, and it told its story well, with its limited amount of, time that it had to tell it. The last 5 episodes had, 20 minutes to tell their stories, but they didn't waste any time. And this is the thing I love about this show, is, it doesn't feel like, your time's being wasted watching this. Every episode feels like it's a continuation of the last episode. It doesn't feel like, one of those shows where you can just watch one episode and not miss out on anything, and you're not going to miss anything in the story. You have to watch every episode of this to fully grasp the story, but luckily, it's not that difficult to see every episode. I mean, you have the whole series uploaded on YouTube, and who knows how many sites at this point. It's not that difficult to watch this show in its entirety, honestly. So you don't have to worry about that. And unlike TCW, it doesn't spend so long on pointless bullshit. In total, the show has 2 hours worth of story. And I felt like it did a much better job of telling its story that it needed it to tell, to get from episode 2 to right before Revenge of the Sith. This show did an amazing job of connecting the 2 films. And this feels like a show that when you're done watching it, you want to watch Revenge of the Sith right afterwards, because it ends right before Revenge of the Sith begins. And you don't have to read a novel to actually get that. I think this show did a great job of doing what it's set out to do. Bridge the gap between episode 2 and 3. Give us, a great series that tells great stories with barely any dialogue and managed to do it well. It didn't waste time on pointless characters, pointless storylines. It actually used the characters, that work with its story, and didn't use characters, for no fucking reason. Like, another good thing about this show, no Jar Jar. No fucking stupid droid fucking episode that freaking focused on R2-D2 and 3PO, and it feels like a pointless filler. This show did, what TCW should have done. I'm not saying TCW had to be, tell its story the exact same way, but this show wasted no time. And to me, that is what makes a good series. Because if most of your show is filler or forgettable trash like TCW is, it's not really worth watching. I know I'm trashing TCW a lot in this review, but it's hard. It's hard not to bring up TCW because there's two of Clone Wars series, and it's pretty obvious which one I prefer. I prefer the shorter series that tells a more cohesive story in a shorter amount of time. It doesn't waste time, with useless characters, useless plot lines that don't need to be there. This show ended perfectly. It didn't last too long. It didn't freaking, overstay its welcome like TCW arguably has. And it didn't bring back characters from the fucking dead just to sell freaking ratings. This show was made by fans who actually wanted to make, a Star Wars show. TCW to me, I can't comment on Rebels, are cash grabs that were made just to make money. And the quality of TCW shows. To me, this is the definitive Star Wars cartoon. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But it's my personal favorite because I feel like it didn't waste any time telling, its story. And I feel like it's a good alternative to TCW. Do you not want to waste 40 hours of your time on a show where 20% of the show is good and most of it is you could just throw away? Watch this. This is short, 2 hours. For 2 hours, you'll have an amazing time. Hell, if you're a new canon person and you're not really a fan of the prequel era, I would check this out. It's short. There's barely any dialogue. The action scenes are freaking sick as fuck to watch. The freaking foreshadowing of Anakin becoming Darth Vader is awesome as hell. The nods to, expanded universe lore is freaking great. The scene where Darth Vader, which actually has the breathing sound with the water, that's fucking great. I mean, there's other stuff I'm pretty sure other people probably have found out about this show that I missed. I think this show is, in this day and age, is so underrated at this point because so many people praise TCW, but people forgot about this show. And I'm going to end this with this. You don't have to like this show more than TCW fans. But you can at least give this show some respect. Because without this show, you would have no TCW, you would have no Rebels. And I'm only bringing up those two shows because those shows are liked by the fandom. But you have to appreciate this to the extent that the show that you prefer would not exist without it. This show is an important part of Star Wars history. It's up there with the movies themselves. I mean, I argue this is more important to Star Wars history than even the EU to a degree, because this paved the way for future shows to exist. After, droids and the Ewok cartoon, came out, this was Star Wars' epic return. And as far as I'm concerned, Star Wars was better than ever at this time in terms of the EU, the cartoons, and all the show that you like now that came after this would have not been possible if this show did not succeed. George Lucas and everyone else would not have bothered making TCW to revisit this era again. Do I still think TCW was unnecessary? From a storytelling perspective, yes. It didn't need to exist. The Clone Wars era was fine as is with this show. But there's not everything about TCW is bad. It has its moments. But I prefer this show for the reasons I stated earlier. The characters, the way Anakin's portrayed. I prefer the movie versions of Anakin Skywalker or TCW does not align with what is established in the movies. This feels like a more genuine prequel to Revenge of the Sith than TCW does. Unnecessary characters aren't included, like Ahsoka. And the animation is really good. TCW's animation is great too. I'm not going to say it wasn't. I just feel like this show doesn't get the respect it deserves these days. And Lucasfilm, you're not watching this video. You're not likely going to ever to see this video. Release a Blu-ray release or 4K of this, for God's sake. This is an important piece to Star Wars history. And in my opinion, this needs to be preserved. Because without this show, you would not have the Star Wars that we know today. Alright everyone, my rating for this is a classic rating. The reason I give this a classic rating because the show has stood the test of time, and I'm not going to repeat the reason why I love this so much. If you haven't seen this show, check it out. If you're one of those new canon fans that are curious about the 2003 Clone Wars, even if it isn't officially canon in the Disney timeline, I think you should watch it. Because I think it's an interesting look in a huge piece of Star Wars history that is arguably just as important as the movies themselves. This is Darth Novia, over and out.